Test on two, test on two.
Test, test, test. Test, 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 test. Test, test, test.
Excellent. All right. Hello, everyone. If I could ask you to take your seats, we're just about to kick off. Excellent. Okay. Can you hear me? No. Yes? You want me to speak louder? All right. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's event on generational renewal and access to land, brought to you by the Greens EFA Group. My name is Natasha Foote. I'm an agri-food journalist based here in Brussels. I have the pleasure of guiding the discussions over the course of this afternoon's event. So this event today is named after a famous song many of you may be aware of by Woody Guthrie. Now, I won't sing unless there are any requests for this. I have been singing. You'd like it? Maybe I'll give it to you for karaoke. I do like a bit of karaoke. Maybe it's not the moment. But the lyrics of this song, we have, this land is my land, this land is your land, this land was made for you and me. But was it? And who can access this land? And are we doing all that we can to make sure that new and young farmers can access Europe's land? Well, these are the questions we're digging into today, focusing on the crucial issue of how to pass the pitchfork to the next generation of farmers. And it's always a good moment to talk about this, as it's a core issue here in the EU, but it is an especially good moment to talk about this as it comes on the back of a number of new developments, this new strategy for generational renewal, and of course, the new plans for the Common Agricultural Policy post-2027. So that's what we're going to dig into today. We're looking at the good, the bad, and in all the things in between of the Commission's plans, what this really means for new and young entrants to farming, trying to build a future in agriculture. So that's enough from me. Let's dig in. And for this, I would like to firstly turn to the Commissioner for Agriculture, Commissioner Hansen, next to me. I pass you the floor.
Great. Good afternoon to everybody. And first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important topic and conference organized by the Greens group here in the European Parliament. And I believe 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago, I had my hearing in the European Parliament, and I made a very strong commitment during that hearing as well. I promised that generation renewal would be a central point in my thinking and my actions over the mandate. And therefore, the new EU strategy for generation renewal in agriculture was adopted on the 21st of October and reflects that commitment. It sets a clear framework as well to make farming more accessible, viable, and more attractive for new generations. And the strategy is based on an extensive consultation with young farmers, with their representatives, member states, and other groups that contributed to it. And their input helped me a lot, identifying as well the key actions and the key needs for making this generational renewal happening. And this is a strategy that is a proactive response to the challenges posed by an aging workforce and the decline in general in rural populations and the shifting dynamics of agriculture. And when we look into the figures, it is an alarming figure, I have to say, that less than 12% of EU farmers are below the age of 40. And the average age is above 57 years of age. This is an average, but I traveled meanwhile to 25 of the 27 member states, and in some member states the figures look even worse. I was in Portugal, for example. 3.8% of the farmers are below the age of 40. The average, and half of the beneficiaries are above the age of 65, half of them. So I think this is really alarming. We have, of course, as well, other member states where it's working way better. Austria is the leader, the best in class in that sense, where around 24% of the farmers are below the age of 40. So we need to look as well what they are doing better than the others. And for me, European agriculture is more than just the food production. It is also, it is of course fundamental for our food security, but as well for climate action and the preservation of our rural vitality. And the future depends on a dynamic new generation ready to take the lead and do the innovation that is needed as well. And the key figure or feature of the strategy is the aspiration to double the support to young farmers, but as well to double the numbers of young farmers by 2040. So what we proposed in the generation renewal strategy is as well a 6% benchmark of agriculture spending dedicated to the generation renewal and therefore to the young farmers as well. I know that when I meet with the farmers organizations or with ministers, often they say, well, but how are we going to spend these 6% for the young farmers? Well, I think there are many ideas on the table, and I hope that some of the ideas how we can better support the young farmers will be coming up here today. So this, the 6% is of course the flexible reference that encourages stronger prioritization of young farmers within the national budgets, and the implementation will take place through the future national and regional partnership plans. And this allows each member state and even the regions, because some member states have, of course, as well the responsibility at regional level to adapt measures to its own context within a common European framework and EU-wide priorities like food security, sustainability, and generational renewal. And the generation renewal strategy includes several flagship initiatives, for example, a startup pack which will simplify support for new entrants by combining startup aid, investment tools, and advisory service. Also, a Women in Farming platform and the Rural Youth Ambassadors will promote the visibility and the peer learning. And we have as well integrated certain aspects into the European semester. And I think that is still a little bit underestimated, but nonetheless, it allows the Commission as well to remind the member states every year to their obligations. And I think that I will come to that later. There are many aspects that are at national responsibility, but nonetheless, will have the tools to put pressure on the member states. And let me also remind you that young farmers also face a significant disadvantage. On average, their income is 14% lower than that of farmers aged from 40 to 60. So this is a very important point to say, and we need to bridge that gap. And we see also disparities for women. Women farmers earn on average 37% less than their male counterparts. But this is not only about income. There's also a serious issue with the overall attractiveness of the sector. And this is why in the CAP proposal, we introduced a new farm relief services to support young farmers during periods of need, essential tools as well for safeguarding mental health and promoting healthier work-life balance. And we discussed a little bit before already what is in there, because I think when young farmers want to enter the job, they want as well to have similar advantages than the other parts of the economy. And when you look into farming, it is almost impossible today to have sick leave, to have child leave, to have parental leave, to have if you need to give, or even go to holidays. And I think this is something very important. And this comes as well with this farm relief services, but also I think it is very important to speak about the attractiveness of the rural areas, because as well farmers want to have similar services to those who we often in the cities think they are normal, or they are, or we take them for granted. And I mentioned the example just before of Elizabeth, a young female dairy farmer from Sweden. She's, I think, member of CEJA as well. And she told me once in a meeting with CEJA, in my region, I have to choose between kids or cows. And I was laughing in the first moment. I said, why? Well, the next childcare facility is 1 hour drive away. So and there is no transportation foreseen. So I would have to drive 1 hour in the morning to get the child there, 1 hour come back, and the same procedure in the afternoon or evening again. 4 hours. A farmer can't afford them to spend them on driving around. So this is something as well where we speak, when we speak about rural areas, where we need to strengthen these services in the rural areas. And then, of course, a big issue, and I got already this brochure, access to land. Access to land is, of course, one of the key elements as well, because without land, you will not be able to produce. And that is, of course, a challenge that is a shared challenge all over the European Union. It is for different reasons. It is, of course, as well, for some reason, because when a new farmer takes over a farm, he or she will be financially at the absolute limit of its possibilities already. And then if there is land available next door, that would be important to make the farm more productive. Well, often they will not be able to access this because it's usually the bigger actors that eat the smaller actors, and that is how it works because they can just pay a better prices and they have better securities. And this brings me as well to a part that is very important, the hectare-based payments. We know that the capping and the degressivity was already discussed at the last reform. We have put it on the table again because I think it is as well in that sense, as I said, it's difficult when there are stronger actors in the market, they will be able to take over a farm, and the new ones and the young ones will not be able because they don't have the same reserves. And just I give you a very practical example. My brother was a farmer and he passed away 2 years ago. His 3 daughters didn't want to continue the farm, so they put it on the market. There was a young farmer interested in starting. He was having some like 60 sheep, and he just wanted to do this professionally. But there was another actor, the biggest farm in Luxembourg, actually. They could simply pay a price that the young farmer was not able to pay. And that is how it goes in practice. And therefore, I think we need to speak openly about capping and regressivity of the payments, because this is, of course, blocking a little bit the access and giving a disadvantage to the young farmers. I know this is controversial because we have different structures, but I think we need to see how we can do that in order that, and another point is, of course, who gets the money? Is it the one that is owning the land, or is it the one that is farming the land? And I want the money to go to the one that is farming the land. And there as well, I think it is important that we come back to some dynamics we had in the past. For example, we moved away from coupled support. I think the coupled support is very important to promote, for example, the production of protein crops in certain areas. And then by doing that, firstly, we fill a little bit the gap where we are heavily dependent on imports from third countries. Secondly, the money will go to the one producing, and not just only to the one owning the land. Because what happens as well, even if you are not the owner and you are renting just the land, well, it is public knowledge what you get. And then the landowner will ask you, well, you get this money, now that's what you have to pay. And that is a huge problem. And then, of course, the young people don't get into the land. And the other problem is one on, if to buy land, you need as well to have money. The access to finance is another big challenge. And there I'm working as well strongly with the European Investment Bank, with Nadia Calvino, to find instruments for attractive securitization, so guarantees for the bank, because usually as a young farmer, you don't have a history in bank loans, you don't have the necessary guarantees, so usually you get very bad conditions. And what is very striking, and I didn't know that, women in farming get even worse credits, and that I think is a discrimination where we should definitely work on to have to fight against this. And I think we have as well, as I said, structural factors. So consolidations of holdings is an issue. We have a very fragmented land market, but what we have put on the table is as well a European land observatory, in order to know who is investing actively in the land. And before we discussed as well already, I had a group of farmers from Eastern Germany in my office, and they were not very happy about the capping and degressivity discussion. And then I asked them, well, I read recently in the press that there is an Australian investor in your neighborhood that bought up 16,000 hectares. Personally, I don't think that investment holding needs to get public support. And what was funny is that one of the farmers was the neighbor of that parcel that was bought. So he agreed in the end that we need to find solutions for that. It's not an easy discussion, but I think that is very important that we work on that. And then, as I said also in the generation renewal strategy, many of the things that some things can be done at European level, but not everything. Because, for example, when we speak about land, it's a national competence. So it is as well to the national authorities to do the homework. When it comes to make it more attractive for the grey farmers to go into retirement, well, pensions is as well a national competence. So we need to push there as well the national governments, and that is where this European semester comes back in play. It is very important that that the homework is done as well when it comes this problematic of farmers, not because many of them need to continue to work because they just don't have sufficient income. And also what I say, what we proposed as well, which is very controversial as well, is that retired farmers should not be entitled anymore to the digressive area-based income support. I know with the transition period, of course, because the systems are not ready, but nonetheless, this I think it is very important so that the land goes over already earlier. I think this is should as well be seen. We are not cutting every support to a farmer, even if he or she is already in retirement age, if they continue to produce, of course, because the agro-environmental measures will still be, can still get them. If it's investment support, they can still get it. If it's areas with natural constraints, they will still get it. But on this income support, the area-based, I think it is very important that we go this step and we go further on that. And then I think there is as well a lot that could be said about other points that are important for the generation renewal. It is farming in general is a very risky business. By risky business, I mean as well the effects, for example, of climate change, because floods, droughts, wildfires are becoming ever more frequent. We have a little bit of a reserve, the agriculture reserve of 450 million annually in order to compensate farmers hit by these catastrophic events, but this is by far not sufficient. So it is very important as well to work on insurance and reinsurance system. Again, I'm in very close contact there with the European Investment Bank in order to design as well structures and schemes that could be attractive and guarantee as well in the case of such disasters. And therefore, because currently we have less than 20% of the agriculture production that is under such an insurance or reinsurance scheme, that is not sufficient. And I think there we need to ramp up this again. So those are some of the elements, but I think I have a little bit more of time afterwards, so eventually we can as well establish a little bit of discussion. I think that would be very important as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, setting the scene so nicely there for the discussions to come, and also the discussions to come over the coming years, because this will be talked about a lot over the coming years. And I understand you have to leave fairly soon for also another event on generational renewal, so you can just see also how strong this topic is here today. And you didn't feel like doing a song either. No, you didn't feel like adding that. Wow, what a disappointment. Anyway, okay, thank you very much. So I'd now like to, well, I can welcome you to take a seat, or would you like to stay next to me for the panel? As you like. You can stay here if you like. You can stay here if you like. I'm going to turn to our first panel session of today. And just before I do, I'd like to remind everyone you can get translation as well if you do need. You can have translation into English, Italian and French. If you need that, do go for that. So our first panel session of today is all about delivering action on generational renewal with a focus on the CAP. And for this, I would like to welcome up to the stage Marion Picot, who is Secretary General of CEJA, that's the European Association for Young Farmers. We also have with us today Ruth Sat, who is a farmer activist and also member of the European Coordination Via Campesina, that's the Small Farmers Associations. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And we also have with us today Anne Picot, who is here representing IFOAM EU, that's the EU Organics Association. And last but certainly not least, one of our kind hosts of today's event, and that is Green MEP Cristina Guarda. So welcome, everyone. Hello, welcome to the stage. How nice it is to have all women on a panel. I think that's not happened to me in a very long time. So it's fantastic to be with you all here on the stage. So I wanted to open with a kind of general question. I mean, the commissioner there was speaking about everything okay? Yeah. The commissioner there was speaking about really getting to the heart of what it is that is discouraging young people from getting into farming. And I have been doing a lot of soul searching recently about why I am sat in Brussels and not farming. Like, really, why am I not doing this? So I've been asking myself these questions, and I'd like to put the questions to you. I'm going to perhaps start with Marion on my left here. Is there something, I'm just curious from your role, from speaking to your members, is there something you believe is the most underestimated obstacle facing young people today entering the farming profession, something we don't talk about so often here in Brussels?
Well, thank you for the floor. And the soul searching is very positive if you are planning on setting up a farm at some point in life. So I encourage the soul searching. When I'm talking with decision makers here in Brussels in general, I'm saying that the most underestimated factor is well-being. And the fact that if you are willing to set up an activity in farming, you might also be comparing what are the other opportunities you get at life. And you might be willing to make a choice where you're going to a sector where you will have certainties at the end of the month, where you will have maybe a job in which you have the benefits that come with it, social protection, some time off to take holidays, some time off to found a family. A lot of questions that are not really the first focus here, because we tend to talk a lot about the way regulations are made and policies and so on. But I think at the end of the day, if you do not have the personal perspective and if you do not see them, this is where all the issues come along of how am I able to build a viable business? How am I able to actually find my place in society? And that's a big need in new generations, creating a meaningful change without compromising on their well-being.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you go straight for the social side of things, because I think that you're right, that we talk about that less. And when I was doing my soul searching, I was thinking about things like holidays. Is it possible to have a life that's balanced and to be a farmer? Ruth, let me come to you. Does this resonate with you? Do you think this is the most underestimated obstacle?
It's definitely an aspect for sure. I think when we talk about entering farming as young people or generational renewal, there needs to be a conversation about the need for long-term support or structural changes rather than kind of this idea that you get a boost to start and then, you know, young people also need to stay in farming rather than only just start farming. And for that, then we need to talk about a transition to a food system that is just and provides autonomy for farmers. So we need to talk about agroecological transition. And for that, we need to have dignified, stable incomes, and those need to be ensured. And for order to that to happen, we need proper market regulation, we need proper regulation on land. And I feel like those are at the core of this conversation.
Yeah, really that accompaniment, not just getting farmers in, but keeping them in, keeping them in a structure that keeps them viable. Anne, let me come to you now. It's a bit the same question. I have two Picos on my panel. I guess you're not a family. No?
We're not.
Oh, okay, that's nice. Just the more the merrier. It's nice. And let me put the same question to you. How does this question resonate with you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what was already said. I could add something else. Well, the Commissioner mentioned discrimination against women, which is a very good sign for us. And I can also stress it with organic agriculture, because we say that organic is a chance for generational renewal. And for us, it's not been stressed enough so far, as we know that organic is especially attractive for future farmers. In France, for example, we have between a third and a half of future farmers who want to actually do organic farming. And also, yeah, there are more organic young farmers than conventional farmers. Like we know in organic, 20% of the farmers are under 40 and only 10% in conventional agriculture. And also on women, we know that more women wish to engage in organic. So we know that we need to address the difficulties in engaging into organic farming, which has been underestimated so far.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very interesting point. I think we'll dig into that a bit further later on in our discussion. Three different flavors to the question now. Cristina, let me come to you. How do you see this question of what is the most underestimated, or what do you hear least maybe in the discussions here in the Parliament?
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your sharing. And I will speak Italian, if it's possible for you. Since we have translation, I'd like to talk in Italian because io sono anche un'agricoltrice.
Because I am a farmer, so coming here to the European Parliament is important. There's essentially 4 points that I think are important. Point one is the difficulty of accessing land. That's what we're talking about today. Because at a local level and a regional level, I was a regional councillor, and we don't talk about that enough. The problem is that if a young person who doesn't have a silver spoon in their mouth, they've come into agriculture, then essentially they end up farming in areas where there is a very low added value in terms of production per hectare, or in areas where it's extremely difficult and complex. And it's a Herculean task to carry out agriculture there. You know, when you have some places where you have more intensive agriculture, I'm from the Prosecco region, for instance. Yes, there is a big investment by investment funds there, and you know, I have 2.7 hectares of vineyard. If I want to grow my business, then you know the seeds, you know, are hideously expensive, and you know, I have to pay a massive amount of money per hectare, and it's impossible for a young person to do that. Then the second point is fair prices. We need to be receive fair prices, and you know, we can't accept that. You know, well, in the most recent CMOs and then the acts on unfair practices, we didn't really grapple with this issue. It's very important, I think, because we shouldn't have to be reliant on help to access agriculture. You know, we should be able to stand on our own 2 feet after 5 years. You know, if I grow potatoes, for instance, and I am paid 7 cents, you know, and I need to get at least, you know, 18 cents to at least cover some of my production costs, I can't stay on the market. And then, of course, you have seeds. So in the first seeds, you need to invest a lot of money into that. Okay, I might get to 40, 50% from support measures for young people. But if I don't have anything else, then I have to take a loan, and that creates a problem for me because, you know, if I have, you know, severe frosts or production difficulties 1 year, then that means I can't pay my mortgage and I have to sell my land. And this is what happened to one of my neighbours. They had to also, you know, hand back the money that was loaned to get the initial seeds. So essentially, it's access and accessibility that are key issues.
Thank you very much for introducing that theme as well. And we'll have more time to dig into the access issue a bit later on. But I wanted to start also, while we still have the Commissioner with us, let's start at the policy side of things, the EU side of things. And the Commissioner laid out there the plans of this new, you know, this new generational renewal strategy, the aim here to double the number of young farmers coming in the coming years. So Ruth, maybe I come to you first on this point. Do you think that this new strategy really meets the expectations of your expectations of what you were hoping for and the expectations of young farmers? Can you talk us through your thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely think that there are some aspects of the strategy that we welcome. I think the recognition of access to land and fair prices as a really important key factor for young farmers, and that's really good that that is stressed. The creation of the initiative to create the EU Land Observatory. We also see that there's an effort to engage in more structural reform, like the doubling of the CAP budget for young farmers and linking direct payments to pension age. But at the same time, we really miss, or we reject the notion that this responsibility of land policy should be transferred or lays with the member states. There is no mention of any regulatory measure to protect the land market, but there is the recognition that we have this issue of speculation that limits land access. There's also no regulatory measure mentioned about anything to ensure fair prices. For example, we need to prohibit that it's possible that you can purchase products below production costs. And we also see that there is a lot of hope or a lot of emphasis placed on digitalization, as well as the natural and carbon credit schemes as a way of diversifying farmers' income. We see some issues with this. First of all, we stress that it's so important that young farmers can have an income from farm production in of itself, and that there is no need to diversify. At the same time, that also means that there, especially when it comes to digitalization, there is a risk of further capital dependency or further corporate control. So we want to stress that the strategy really should not be seen as separate from the ongoing CAP reform process, especially with the risk of a lowered budget. And also, again, the Commission needs to take responsibility, because we kind of have a paradox now where we have a common market on agricultural products without a common policy on farm structures. The CAP in itself is a really strong land policy, even though we say that a lot of the initiatives lays with the member states. The CAP, especially with the per hectare based subsidy, shapes the way that land is currently distributed, the way that we can access land. A few weeks ago, close to my family's farm, 1 hectare of land was sold for 230,000 euros, which is such an insanely huge number that I can't even fathom how that I could ever pay for that. And we see, of course, it differs per region, but we see overall that land becomes something that is just a speculative thing rather than a need that we have to produce food.
Yeah, 230,000 for 1 hectare, did you say? Wow, I thought I misheard that, but no, that's quite an incredible number. Marion, let me come to you now on the same point here. I mean, Roos there was talking about some incoherence, perhaps, with, we've got the CAP on the one hand, but also this generational strategy. Do you see them going hand in hand? How do you see that relationship? And do you see that that the EU, from the EU side, are really putting our money where our mouth is? And we spoke about this 6%. What has been the kind of feel from your members after this publication of this strategy, which is quite fresh? Yeah.
Well, it's not a surprise that we were actually awaiting the strategy quite eagerly. I think the first thing to highlight is a strategic document like this is quite rare when it comes to generational renewal. The last one is 2000. It was a white paper. And rereading it the last time made me realize a big thing. We are actually in an era where the EU is not afraid to talk about land, about farm transmission, farm succession, social aspects, mental health of farmers in a strategic document. And I think this is, at least for the former member of CEJA, a big success and a big victory. And I have come across a lot of former members being absolutely thrilled that those topics are involved in the document. So I think there is a lot of coherence to be made. I also want to remind you that in this CAP period, member states were supposed to indicate in their strategic plans how they're going to build coherence with the national policies to support young farmers. They have failed to do so. Most of those elements they brought forward are not really up to the standards that one would expect. And in the CAP proposals, there is actually that provision very important that says that member states will have to draw up a national strategy. So the tools are here. There is a lot of interesting leverages that could be used. Obviously for us, where we felt very let down as young farmers is on the actual budgetary aspects of it and the mandatory aspect of it, which prompted us to say that the tools are here, but the delivery is uncertain. What will guarantee that there is a certain type of delivery? First, the willingness of member states, which I have to say in 2025 is not achieved in every part of the EU. We are facing some national governments which have no willingness to consult their young farmers and certainly not to support them. So for us, we're still trying to understand how the national specific recommendations will force them or actually make it mandatory for those to support the young generations. We have heard also the European semester, in which we're still trying to understand how to involve ourselves, how to make it effective. But my biggest message is, back in 2013, during the CAP reform, CEJA had a very long fight to try to have a minimum budget dedicated to young farmers. In the past reform, we were also feeling quite alone defending it, but we went now to 3% minimum of national envelopes for direct payments. And now with the proposals, there is no certainty that this budget can be pursued. So this to us is the biggest complication. It is also a huge responsibility and duty, in our view, for young farmers organizations, because it means we need to pick up the work. We need to go in every capital, convince about the necessity of young farmers. And it is a top priority at EU level, but it is something that is not necessarily the case all over the EU. And this is for us the biggest work ahead in a very long time, both for organization and individual young farmers. So we are very concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Touching upon the wider issue there within the CAP, we're talking about so much, how to encourage the member states and how, this push at the national level, the ambitions, the mismatch there. Cristina, let me bring you in to follow up on this point. I mean, how do you see the interaction between the strategy on generational renewal and the ambitions there and this current CAP proposal on the table? I mean, are we pushing in the same direction? Does more need to be done? Will you speak in Italian? Or?
Yes.
Okay, I'm ready.
Thank you very much. Allora.
Thank you. So we have this new CAP and we have the strategy and also the initiatives in the strategy. What I can say at the outset is that as long as we just have recommendations, then there's a fear that we will not be able to actually put in the national plans what we actually need to do. So it's good that there is a 6% ring fencing for young people. But the principle is, if this is only in the strategy and if it's only a recommendation and it's not actually in the CAP, then this objective, well, it doesn't become strategic in nature. So having a CAP where there isn't a clearly defined target for clearly defined objectives, well, essentially it's just words, and it's up to the national authorities how they're going to do their work. Now, yes, we do have national measures. We have the National Youth Strategy. That's a good thing. But if we don't have any obligations, if we don't have targets, and especially if we don't have the obligation to carry out a historic analysis and look at how the measures have been working up to now, so which companies that have been supported, received generational renewal support, have they survived? Have they been able to access loans from banks? We have to look at where one system has worked and another one hasn't. Unless we have these data at a national level, then there is a risk that we're not going to be able to meet the expectations of young farmers. They're not going to be able to have access to appropriate land. And there are issues also in terms of the new climate challenges, which actually call into question farmers' survival. And you have national governments who may not meet those needs. And if you look at the challenges faced by young farmers, especially young female farmers, there is a risk that we won't be listened to, but at a national level, you're going to come up with policies which are essentially open to intensive lobbying. So we know that a lot of people are retiring, and in the next 10 years, we need essentially to breathe new life into agriculture. We do need generational renewal in agriculture, that's clear. But on the basis of what model? If it's based on old models and we haven't actually analysed what has worked and what hasn't from these models, then we're going to end up with a type of agriculture that doesn't actually meet the needs of the future. What about having good representation in terms of organics? But what about the CAP? Do we have ring fencing for organics? And then for young female farmers, we need to get across that we are actually making our land more resilient to climate change. And then if you look at that as a whole, that is not enough. We can't just, you know, toe the line there. Against that backdrop, I can see that there is scope for improvement here in the Parliament, working together with the Commission, looking at how we can develop a strategy which actually responds to the climate emergency, because, you know, we know that there is a climate emergency also here in Europe. There's also a problem in terms of access to the market for SMEs. If we don't support young agriculture, young farmers, to actually manage these challenges, then essentially they're being left to their own devices without any sort of European food sovereignty strategy, which is based on world trade. No, we need to look at how we can shine a light on fruit and veg and protein crops of production here in Europe. And young farmers are part of that, and we need to be aware of the hectares that we have at our disposal to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And thank you to the translator for keeping up with that. You mentioned there, Cristina, getting more people in organic, more of a focus on organic and the ring fencing for organic. Maybe I'll stay on that theme. I'll come to you, Anne. It's a nice segue for me. You mentioned in your introduction, you know, many of the new farmers setting up being more environmentally minded, as Cristina was talking about, you know, the climate concerns, environmental concerns, and that they're often organic, or maybe they're more interested in being organic. It's an interesting pull for them. Is there enough accent, do you see, then, on the green transition in these strategies coming out in the proposals here? You know, there's this new transition payment that's outlined. Do you think this goes far enough in terms of farmers both transitioning but also entering into organic agriculture?
Yes, thank you for the question. I can first maybe stress out that it is more difficult for most of the organic future farmers to set up their farm than for conventional farmers, as most of the candidates for organic farming don't come actually from an agricultural background. It means that they don't have a family farm that they can take over. So it's way more difficult for them to access to land. And there is also the question of skills that they have to get to be able to produce organic. So we definitely have to help them specifically. Like, we can't expect from the overall policy to target organic farmers or organic future farmers. There is also then an incoherence with the CAP proposal on the CAP proposal regarding the objectives of the strategy, because in the current CAP proposal, the agro-environmental measures will have to be financed by the member states, which makes organic farmers in a very grey area regarding the amount of income payments that they will be entitled to. So that means that they need a clear ring fencing of CAP money for organic, environment, climate, etc. Like, only stable policy support will provide us a long-term perspective and actually an incentive to continue producing organic. It means also that without these tools, the EU is probably going to miss its ambition to double the number of young farmers by 2040. And also is going to miss the goals of the strategic dialogue on organic that has been talked about last year. And this concerns especially the mission letter on farmers in need, as we already talked about it before.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And you mentioned there that, you know, many of these farmers, new farmers, are setting up without structures. You know, they're maybe not from a farming background. And actually, that's something I want to dig into a little bit. My next question. One thing I do hear a lot in discussions in Brussels is about the family farm structure. But something I'm seeing more and more, I mean, obviously they are very important to Europe's farming foundations, but as I'm traveling around and meeting different farmers and speaking to young farmers, specifically the ones that come to Brussels to talk, I often say, how are you here? Like, how is it that you're here? They're setting themselves up more and more in a kind of more collaborative structures that I see, a kind of co-farmer status, which exists in some member states, not others. Maybe, Ruth, I'd be really interested to come to you and say, is this something that you also see being asked for by new and young farmers? And, you know, what needs to happen to kind of push forward this more collective or shared farming kind of structure?
I definitely think that there's these kinds of different ways of constructing your farm. It's definitely something that is happening, but I think it's important to ask why it's happening. I think, yeah, of course, especially if you enter farming and you don't come from a farming background, or you don't have a family farm that you can take over, it can be really good or nice, or maybe you can learn more when you share that burden. But at the same time, you see that a lot of people find these kinds of constructions because they have to, because they can't provide themselves with a good income by just running their farm themselves, or maybe just buying a farm themselves, also impossible. So I think it's important that when we look at different ways that farms are organized, or maybe new kind of structures that are being talked about, that we ask, okay, but why is this happening? I know a lot of colleagues of mine that work in these kinds of structures because just farming, it doesn't provide them with enough income. They have to have another job on the side, and doing it in this way means that they can farm and someone else can help them out, and they can also have another job to provide income. And it's a question whether that is something that we want. If you want to say we want to have farmers to have a stable, fair income, then we should look at what are the mechanisms that provide or not provide that, rather than say, oh, this is a new kind of way that we can organize a farm, is something that we should support.
Yeah, it's interesting to view it in a way of a response of not having, enough support, maybe. I mean, Marion, I'd be quite interested to hear your views on this. I mean, how does this tally with what you're seeing and hearing from young farmers in terms of this more innovative social structure of farms?
So we are very lucky in CEJA because we have a lot of different models within our membership. We have different type of sustainable practices, from organic. 3 board members out of 5 are organic young farmers. But we also have new farmers and so on. So for me, it's interesting to see that question. My first element of answer is that if you look at the society at large, it's quite a common thing for new generations to seek collaborative forms of working. That is why, for example, we have such issues with young doctors and nurses in rural areas. They're looking to work in medical centers. It is not surprising to me that a sector as dynamic and innovative as agriculture would take the same path. I think you do have benefits to associate, to work together with other young farmers. It's about sharing the risk of undertaking that activity. It can also be via, diversification. We have some models, including here in Belgium, we have one of our representatives who is associating with different type of farming as well. It's also about sharing the workload, allowing you to also take time off to think about the future of your enterprise and so on. So I think it is not a surprise that those forms are developing, and even in family farms. Let's also stay aware of that I know lots of family farms who are already cooperating with farmers next door. We have wine producers cooperating with grazing livestock. So you do have many of those shapes. And I think it is often because, it's to regroup and making sure to feel less alone. But I think it can also produce very strong benefits economically for the community around. So every model is honestly an interesting one to develop for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, that the new generation is looking more to, wanting more of this collectivity. And you mentioned also the link with the rural in other kind of areas as well. I mean, Cristina, perhaps I come to you on this point. Do you see, I think you mentioned something about this, I can't quite remember, about traditional structures, but do you see that we're asking the right questions here? Are we asking outdated questions to this new generation, do you think, or outdated assumptions to new requests of new needs from this new generation of farmers?
Grazie.
Thank you very much.
Allora,
So I think it's very important what Marion has just said. And it's very important because it enables us to work on the issue of rights. Because if we think about all of the issue of women in agriculture, co-farming is one of the things that enables us to be part of a system which essentially enables us to build, and something that is something that has been rather complex up to now. But above and beyond this, the impression that I have, hearing from what lots of people are saying, is that also in politics, there's a risk that we are romanticizing everything. Also the type of holding as well, the family farms where you have the whole family working on a farm. Yes, they're very significant, it's widespread, but it's also very romanticized because very often we don't shine sufficient light on the jobs that women do in those family farms. When we talk about young people, we often think about a young person using a smartphone, controlling everything with technology, and I think that gives a view that is perhaps too automized, and that doesn't reflect the reality. And then, as I say, there's this problem of romanticizing agriculture. Perhaps this is something that people who live in urban areas think, and they say, well, we need to go back to the roots. But there is a risk here. There is a production problem. There are people interested in production issues, and that's good. But if we don't have the local market structures, then there is a risk that we are over romanticizing this and not coming up with the instruments that will help people to stay on the market. And this creates social issues. So from a communication point of view, perhaps we over romanticize these models, and also the difference between the approach in rural and urban areas. There are different needs, of course. Rural areas, essentially, you need to to help farmers find their customers in urban areas. It's easier. If you're in Brussels here, then it's easier to obtain the markets and actually get to your customers. So there are different problems with different types of holdings, which are in these models, which you could class as being a bit old hat. And if the CAP remains static and remains beholden to a given model, regardless of new production techniques and new realities that develop, that doesn't create the degree of flexibility that you need, because you need to make sure that it's flexible enough so that everybody can access this type of support. You need to look at new models. Initially, co-farming was not considered a part and parcel of farming. It wasn't. It didn't fit in the traditional structure. So you have to look at new innovations. It's true, but at present, I think there is a need to upgrade. We need to analyze historic data. We need to work out what has worked and what hasn't. Also, look at the emerging challenges for holdings, and then we need to structure a CAP which looks at what do we need to produce to ensure food security today and tomorrow, and who do we need to work with to do this. So who are we dealing with here? Who are the new holdings, the new farmers on the market?
Thank you. And just building on this, who are these new farmers? I wanted to ask a question to you, Anne, about this shift I'm seeing that is really pulling some new farmers, new young farmers, which is into regenerative agriculture, which is we're hearing a lot about this. We're hearing it also, it's entering policy discourse. Cristina spoke about a certain romanticization. I think it is a fairly romanticized sometimes, but also really building a momentum, right? There is quite a strong kind of momentum around this regenerative idea. With this, I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts on this, about, what this means in terms of organic versus regenerative amongst the new farmers, and also what this means moving forward in policy discourse.
Yes. First, what we think on regenerative agriculture is that there is kind of a false debate between organic and regenerative, as organic is always and has always been regenerative, given our practices, the protection of the soils, protection of biodiversity. We organic practices also contribute to a better fertilization of the soils. And so I would say that for young farmers, most of them are proud to be organic. There has been like a figure in France where 86% of organic farmers, overall, not all young, are proud to produce organic. Yeah, it's a good thing then if any discourse can make agriculture attractive. But young farmers need to have a precise frame on how they can produce. And it's often very hard to know what actually regenerative agriculture means, whereas the organic label has a very clear frame, a very clear regulation, and is also clearly defined and certified. So the term regenerative agriculture can lead to a confusion for young farmers, for whom it's already hard to decide, like, what should I do on my farm? Which production should I start first? And how should I use my fertilizers and so on? So as we know that young farmers are seeking for the best practices and the most environmentally friendly systems, they will turn to organic regenerative agriculture anyway. So you can't speak about regenerative without speaking about organic. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, no, it's an interesting emerging theme, I do think. So I think in terms of starting to explore this, I think it's an important one. I'm aware the clock is ticking, but we did start a little bit late, so I might try and squeeze in one more question before I throw out to the floor for some questions. And the question I wanted to land on last was looking really at this question of training. So I was reading this latest report from the Commission on young entrants to farming. I think it was just released in October, so it's also quite fresh. And one thing that really stuck out to me is that young farmers tend to possess a higher level of formal agricultural training than other farmers. But I was wondering about if there's enough focus, enough accent on this in terms of access to the right training structures in place for what the new generation is asking, especially maybe with a greener focus in mind, or perhaps different concerns. So I was perhaps going to put the question to either Ruth or Marion, or both, if you're keen to talk about this. Is something that interests you? Yeah, go for it.
I think on the topic of training, definitely something that needs to be encouraged, and also programs need to be set up, is farmer to farmer training. So rather than having these dynamics where you have an outside expert that comes in that tells farmers on how to work, it is also really important to make sure that a lot of the knowledge that is there in the farming communities is exchanged, and that there are mechanisms in ways that farmers can meet each other and exchange knowledge, especially because there is a lot of knowledge that isn't the kind of knowledge that you would encounter in a textbook, but is really valuable when you work on the land. So emphasizing that, I think, in when you talk about training a new generation, or also the needs in new generations you see, is that, yeah, I've read this in a textbook, but then how does it work in practice? I think that kind of translation definitely needs to be made.
Yeah, I can definitely feel that. I was also working as a young farmer once, and translating from a textbook into practice is very challenging. Marion, did you have something to add on this point?
Yeah, I think I'm going to bring a bit of a more polemical response. I think a lot of public authorities have given up on agricultural education and rely too much on other actors, both at primary education or training, lifelong learning, advisory services. And I think that is the real problem nowadays, that if you want to train yourself on new practices, on your investment, on marketing your products, you have to be proactive, find the resources yourself. It can be difficult. And I think this is the biggest problem. In the last CAP reform, we spent a lot of time discussing about how to have a more tailored advisory services from public authorities for young farmers, newcomers to the sector. And 2.5 years after, there has not been a lot of progress on that topic. So I think overall, we need to do better. And I want to also highlight the fact that lots of young farmers organizations or filling the gap for public authorities. We have Corentin that's going to speak on the next panel. They have an amazing educational service in his organization, training people on the use of plant protection products, what are possible alternatives, but also how to convert to organic agriculture, how to kickstart your own business, how to sell directly, and so on. And I think this role is not acknowledged enough, so we should definitely highlight those good practices and the great things they are doing for young farmers.
Excellent, and you highlighted there, Corentin. We'll hear more from you in the next panel. But before we get to that, I would like to now throw out to the audience to see if you have any questions for our panelists. Does anybody have any questions? Don't all jump at once. Yes, I have a question here. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and say who your question is addressed to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Anna Froz and I work with Collègues Europe. It's really nice to see you all here today. My question would have been for the Commission, so I will still ask my question and then feel free to answer if you want. First of all, I wanted to thank MEP Guarda for also mentioning that we romanticize the family life and family farm. I am a farmer myself, so I work here in Brussels, but back home in Italy, I'm also a farmer. And this really resonated with my experience. Speaking on behalf of Collègues Europe, we also welcome the strategy and regeneration of renewal, but we also equally concerned that roles from ECVC shared regarding carbon credits. We were sitting on the youth policy dialogue with Commissioner Hansen twice, in May this year and December last year. There was not a lot of talking about carbon and nature credits. We didn't talk about that. We didn't agree on that. So we are concerned about why this has been included after discussing with us, with the stakeholders. And we also agree with what MEP Guarda said regarding the fact that if everything is swifted towards the hands of the member states, how do we control what's actually happening? This is definitely concerning. We have a strategy, but how do we act concretely after that? So thank you very much.
Okay, two quite big questions there. I don't know who would like to take which one when. Yeah, would you like to come here?
Yes, of course, I cannot reply for the Commission, but equal surprise on the carbon and nature credits. For us, the chapter on income, it's actually the weakest in the strategy. There is a lot of reference to diversification and looking at different type of production, especially to be more resilient, profitable, and have a better management of the risk. But for us, that creditization of environmental action is not necessarily a good signal. We think that public authorities should also take a bigger role in that and not just leave the entirety of the environmental and climate action in the hands of private actors. I could also link this to regenerative agriculture. Lots of actors come with their own pilot projects. They are not necessarily similar from one actor to another. I question whether this is actually a long-term path for young people in farming. The first experience with carbon credits are very positive, but we all know that it's not lasting 40 years, which is the duration of the careers of the people we work with.
Grazie infinite della domanda.
Yes, thank you very much for that question.
Allora, le due domande sono...
So those were two very interesting questions. On the issue of credits, so carbon and nature credits, this is an issue which we discussed last week, if I'm not mistaken, in the Agriculture Committee. And I think what we need to say here is it's clear, you know, for me as a member of the Greens, then of course, you know, we need to shine a light on the production ecosystem. But the principle with here is with the credits, there's a risk that you transfer public responsibility to a market that is controlled by the private sector. And I fear here that this could bring economic pressures to bear on agriculture. So you need to use the credits not for yourself, but to pay consultants who will then manage these practices. So what I want us to discuss against this backdrop is that we are living in a time where we're not dealing just with the climate, it's climate change, but the availability of natural resources makes us understand how much agriculture needs to be front and centre, because we were dealing with our very survival. So, you know, payments per hectare, that's gone. So we don't just need to look at the food that's produced via honest and correct payment, but we need to look at the production of of a public service. When a farmer engages in organic farming, that essentially creates an added value. It's a public service. In Veneto, my region, I've seen how we've taken measures to ensure that we have enough water, and downstream, you need to carry out agriculture in a certain way to ensure that there is enough water for everybody. So it's interesting to talk about these issues, but it's very important that we try and strike a balance here when it comes to the public good that we're dealing with here and how we manage that. Then the second issue. What was the second question again, as the speaker? Yes, I've already given you my answer on that. It's very dangerous to not have a European strategy, because the risk here is, you remember what happened with Ukraine? It looked as though, we were going to have to, even plant cereals in the middle of roundabouts to deal with the global instability and all of the trade aspects that would stem from that. So this is essentially the challenge today. If you just have national strategy, then it means that every national government will decide which sector they're going to support less, which sector they're going to support more. And the risk here is that you create unfair competition, even within Europe, not just outside of Europe. And that is what worries me.
Yes, I think that's a concern that's been echoed by many in the last few weeks, definitely. I think, did we have one more question, or shall we move to the next panel? I'm imagining hands. Okay. Well, that's fine. Okay, in which case, I think I will have to bring this panel to a close. Thank you very much to all of my speakers. Perhaps a round of applause for all of our speakers there. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. And so I will now move to our second panel today. We've already touched upon the issue many times throughout this event, so now it's the time to really dig into it properly. And that is on, of course, access to land. As the Commissioner said, we have a whole host of young farmers, but if they've got nowhere to farm, what's the point? This is an intrinsic issue here connected to generational renewal. So for this, I would like to welcome to the stage, firstly, Martin Rose, who is from Terre-en-vue, a Belgian movement. He'll talk more about this, facilitating access to land for agroecological farmers. Martin, welcome. Yes, oh, thank you very much. There we go. We also have with us today Corentin Jacques, who is a Vice President of the Fédération des Jeunes Agriculteurs. Corentin, welcome, bienvenue. We also have with us today Francesca Gironi, who is Chair of Copa-Cogeca's Women's Committee. Yes, you're here already. Perfect. And last, but of course not least, also one of our kind hosts of today's event, and that is Green MEP Saskia Bremont. So Saskia, welcome. So we have already mentioned, as I said, multiple times, the question of access to land, and it is increasingly recognised as one of the biggest roadblocks for new and transitioning farmers. But perhaps to kick off our panel, we can kick off with an opening question to each of our speakers, which is, in your view, what would be the most urgent land-related challenge that we need to tackle and look at today? So Martin, perhaps I'm looking at you to start. You're pulling a face, so
there's so many challenges that it's not easy to prioritize, let's say. I would say land scale and land prices are really the biggest issue. I was just wondering when I was listening to the speakers, when we started 20 years ago, I remember that we were witnessing statistically a free fall of small-scale farming in Europe, like everywhere in Europe. This trend is now slightly leveling out, because there is, statistically speaking, still very little small-scale farms, let's say farms that are less than 5 hectares, unless we look closely at countries like Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, where small-scale farming is still quite present. Today, I think the scale of the problem that happened at that time when like new entrants still, let's say rather, already had difficulties entering into farming because of access to land, this problem has basically amplified. The scale of farms to be taken over by new entrants is bigger and the prices have risen. So I think the most urgent thing is that we still have the same problem as 20 years ago, but it has become amplified. It's become even more stronger. So unless we were to really act upon the development of land scales and land prices, the trend will just continue, and we will probably end up in the situation that we're now witnessing, for instance, in Denmark, where the state is buying out farmland for billions of euros because of the negative impact it experiences on water quality. This is quite, I mean, when we talk to our Danish partners, they are telling us, like, don't continue doing what we have been doing the last 20 years. Change. So I think it's a lesson to be learned from them. So yeah, that's, let's say in a nutshell, how we as a network see the biggest challenge.
Yeah, interesting to have that warning there, you know, of the trajectory, and really say, you know, now is the moment to tackle this issue.
Exactly.
Francesca, let me come to you. I put the same question to you from your perspective, from Copa-Cogeca's side. I mean, what would you say is the most urgent issue here to talk about when it comes to land access?
Thank you very much. If it's not a problem, I'm going to speak in my mother tongue, Italian. Grazie.
Thank you very much for that question. Now, one of the issues which I think is most closely linked to access to land for women is the issue of access to credit. In the Copa-Cogeca Women's Committee, we recently had a survey. We asked 900 entrepreneurs from a range of different EU countries, and the upshot was that access to land is linked to the lack of access to credit. If I don't own land, then the bank will not provide me with financing for my endeavours. Another thing that's very important as I see it is that whilst 88% of women who replied to the survey have a leadership position in a company, only 41% of them have a stable income. So almost half of women who work in agriculture do not have a recognised income. So I'm sure you will understand that if you don't have a clear, discernible, determined income, you know, a formal income, then it is almost impossible to have access to credit. And without credit, then you don't have any access to land. And what is the link here? What can women do to access financing? Only a quarter of them found it an easy process, whereas for more than half of them, it was very complex and very difficult. And this was also, they said, due to the fact that they are females. Now, as I'm sure you're well aware, women tend to see things in a positive light, and they like to seek out solutions. So 54% of people who were interviewed said that if instruments, specific instruments, were made available to enable females to access credit, then they would be more likely to request financing. So I think the most urgent challenge that we face is trying to reconcile all of this. Gender policies, linking those up with land policies, financial policies, trying to ensure that access to credit is improved for women. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. A very crucial part of this conversation. I think we'll come back to that a bit later. But firstly, Corentin, let me put the same question to you. How do these responses so far resonate, or do you see something else as being maybe the most urgent or more urgent in the list of urgent things?
Hi, thanks for the invitation and the question. If it's not a problem, I'll continue in French. It's easier. Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. For the FJA, the most important thing to do today is to create a strong definition of an active farmer. We think that if we want mobility in terms of land and young people having access to land and real intergenerational renewal, then we need the older generation to give the space to the young generation. So an active farmer is, on the one hand, those farmers, in our opinion, who benefit from a pension, and it's also associations of land who don't belong to young farmers, and they're not young people who come from an agricultural background. The key point for us is to give access to future generations to land.
Definition of an active farmer, which rears its ugly head every CAP reform, and we still haven't got this definition down. But you're right; it's absolutely central to how we view things going forward. Saskia, last but not least, let me come to you now. How do these? I mean, you've heard there what we think the most urgent issue is, from three different flavors there. How does that resonate in terms of the conversations you're having at this level in the Parliament? And do you see there's anything else that you'd like to add to this?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I will also be speaking French, so keep your headphones on. Thank you to the first panel as well, because I think there were lots of issues that are also related to us today when it comes to priorities. For example, there are three speakers here, three different priorities: access to financing and loans, access as well to land, because there are farms which are becoming ever larger. This idea of having a definition that we've been calling for so long, of a definition of what an active farmer is and what that means. But it's clear that the political forces don't necessarily share our opinions. We've heard from Commissioner Hansen. In the Agri Committee, we've also heard many times that this is a concern that's shared across the political groups when it comes to access to land and farms. There are 38 million farmers. So there's huge numbers of farmers and farmers that are disappearing. And so this is something that should really be a wake-up call to our politicians. And so access to loans for young people and women especially, the definition of what an active farmer is, and access to land. We need to regulate when it comes to this. This is something that's as part of the CAP, but it needs to be a global response. And the key question to all of this is around speculation when it comes to land. When it's about accessing private capital and the necessary regulation, we're always hitting the same problems, and that's the fact that there is industrial agriculture, and it's not a model that's based on diversification. We need to facilitate a larger number of different models, cooperative farming, for example, lots of different models, and encourage the access to loans and credit that's related to that. And so that's my priority, and I've responded to lots of different panelists. We're trying to respond to all of the issues that exist in farming. And then I've got my second issue. Now, people often wonder, why am I looking at agricultural issues? Well, it's because I'm also looking at global trade. And agriculture and trade are linked. When it's this, we see this race towards industrialization. Then there's the food approach to the question when it comes to the EU's food policy that the EU wants to subsidize. This is another aspect that I wanted to mention, because of course all of this is closely linked.
Very much. There were multiple things there, but that's okay because there are multiple elements that we must dig into. And actually, let's stay at the level of the EU policy and let's talk about one of the things mentioned by the Commissioner, which is one of the more recent ideas coming out of the EU side of things, and that's, of course, the EU Land Observatory. So perhaps we can dig into here, maybe Martin, I'll come to you first, but I'd be curious to hear from others about how hopeful you are about this kind of observatory in terms of, what can it realistically do for countering this land concentration? We're talking about the financialization. What do you see anything? Are you hopeful about this? How far does it go?
There's different reflections to be had. First of all, we are, even though I'm not a woman, I have a positive view on it. So there are also men having positive views on things. I think it's complex. If we were to compare with an observatory on the quality of water, soil, biodiversity, we can measure water quality, we can measure soil quality, biodiversity, but it's very difficult to measure fair access to land. And this is probably the objective, or should be the objective, of a land observatory. Of course, we can observe land market trends, see who is buying, who is selling, what is the profile of typical landowners, and how this market is moving. But if we want to treat the question of fair access, I think we have to go a step further than just observing, and this is going to be the political question behind the functioning of a land observatory. When we were listening to Hansen, he was explaining us the importance to correlate with other domains, other EU objectives, such as climate objectives, soil quality objectives, water objectives. I think we need to correlate kinds of farming. Though I completely agree with what has been said before, that we need different kinds of models of farming. We need to correlate how we do farming and what consequences these types of farming have on water quality, soil quality, and biodiversity. If we want to reach objectives in these different fields, well, we need to look at the farming sector as a potential lever to get to these goals. So if a land observatory is there to monitor the impact of different farming models on these other fields, then I think we can get somewhere. As long as we disconnect farming from the other fields, I don't think we can get anywhere, because there will not be any measurable objective data to be monitored, and thus policies to be adapted if we witness that we don't reach these goals. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, because it means that we need to develop a political view on what kind of farming do we want, and how do we want to redistribute land to different kinds of farming, having different kinds of impacts on all these resources. No.
And saying on that, thank you for that. Saying on this theme, Corentin, maybe I bring you in on this point. I mean, how do you see this kind of EU level observatory? Do you see this as a gateway to broader EU kind of action? I mean, building on what Martin has just mentioned here.
Donc, nous avons déjà.
We already have a land observatory in Wallonia. So there's an enlargement of this perspective. In principle, we are in favor. But of course, observing is one thing, that's good. But what would be good to know, as has already been mentioned, we need to know who's buying and why. Is it for leasing, for example? But one thing that we are positive about is that there is a possibility for a young farmer to end up in tenant farming, and they don't have the ability to buy, and so we need public money in order to allow them to buy the land. Hopefully at some point then there might be a reduction in prices as well. And so what we want is a lowering in prices. And so we believe that in order to get this system in areas where there's very high land prices and where young people are not even able to continue their work because of the price of the land, this will allow family agriculture to remain in place in Wallonia and across the EU as a whole.
To build on this point, actually, Saskia, maybe I come to you. I mean, Martin was mentioning there that, you know, it comes down to also then a very political choice about what we do with the, you say, you know, it's very well to observe something, but then in terms of taking the action of what we really want to happen with this, I mean, how do you see the future of this policy?
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Well, I'm very pleased to see that this pilot project that the Commission is putting in place more permanently. So I share your point of view. It's good to see that good practices can then give rise to more permanent measures. And so I'm grateful to the Commission and Hansen. And it's very effective against all of the obstacles. It's good to see that this tool is not simply greenwashing. We need to make sure it's good that they've taken everything into account and actually put it into place. There's not an observatory that's simply an institution, but needs to continue to work, yes, as a consulting institution, but also one that's active in order to help female farmers and young farmers and everyone represented. And if not, then that would be a failure, another institutional failure that won't have led to anything. And so it needs to be a place where you can exchange good practices. Enlargement is a bit of a taboo in many countries. There's this idea of young people having priority when it comes to buying land. The lack of statistics and the need for statistics when it comes to agriculture. The EU requires agricultural autonomy, and so that's a good idea, but we need to work out how to get there in reality. Currently, the agricultural model is more of an exporting model, and that will be difficult when we're trying to maintain our agricultural autonomy. So what do we need as Europeans so we're not cutting ourselves off from the rest of the world? So we need a vision in terms of our needs when it comes to land available in order to ensure our food security. And that's what we don't currently have. So this observatory will be able to contribute to this so that we are able to take into account of biodiversity, climate change, another taboo would be farmland versus different uses of land. So for energy or for industry, for solar panels, wind turbines, for example. This is different in each of the different regions. This is an endless debate because it's always a conflict around what we're going to use land for. It says the public services and also the European level as well. We can't simply look at this from a short supply chains point of view. We need to look at it at a European level as well, which is why it's a good idea to have this EU observatory so that we can move forward together. And of course, this remains a member state prerogative. But nonetheless, I am convinced that if we get this observatory, we see the commitment of the stakeholders and lobbying towards the government at a member state and regional level, then that can lead to a situation where we get rid of this taboo. And I'm talking about taboos because in lots of countries, people think that there should be ceilings, for example, on when it comes to land. So this is regulation which is tackling and really cutting deep in our usual liberal policies. But if this can work and we can actually change the trend, then this will be a big success.
I can see Martin next to me, very keen to come in and say something. Francesca, I haven't forgotten you. I'll come back to you, but just a quick reaction. You wanted to say something.
There is, so well, we talked about Terre-en-vue, but also preceding the Access to Land Network, and we see all over Europe initiatives that are very similar to what you presented. So the state intervening when there is land sales. I think it's paramount that the Land Observatory on a European level is going to plug into best available policies and see, okay, what is actually happening in Europe? What are the pilot projects that already exist, and learn from that and make sure that, okay, what is going wrong in Wallonia, for instance, with the Land Observatory, every now and then publishing land prices and thereby sometimes even contributing to raising land prices. Well, we should learn from that and see how can we avoid this. Or when we see that a public state body decided not to sell at the highest price, but at a fixed price with predetermined criteria, that this is a possibility. And this should be seen as a kind of example that can be exported to other countries. So I think that it's a role we should not neglect that the observatory could have to really diffuse best available policies all over Europe.
Yeah, really connecting the dots between what's happening now, what's working. You kind of preempted my next question for you, but that's okay. I'm going to work around it. That's fine. But first, let me stay at the EU level of things before we zoom back in on the ground, more on the ground. And let me come to you, Francesca. I mean, also saying, you know, and we've spoken a lot about the CAP, this new CAP proposal that is on the table. What do you see the role here in pushing, you know, in the CAP into connection with land availability and access, affordability? I mean, does this feature enough in the conversation? What's your view here on how the CAP proposal comes into things?
Thank you for the question. I'm going to speak in Italian too. Noi crediamo fermamente.
Well, we very strongly believe that the CAP is an instrument which is decisive in improving the economic accessibility and availability of land. We should not forget that the main instrument that can guarantee and ensure that farmers have a future in rural areas this could be an instrument which ensures the vitality of those rural areas as well. But this will only be the case if the CAP is an autonomous, strong policy, and only if it has dedicated financial resources. In the MFF that is taking shape, this is the focal point, really. If there is a risk that the CAP comes in under the umbrella of a bigger fund, then its efficiency may well be diluted. So that would undermine the essential instruments that we need to support farmers and to support those that actually want to have access to land today. A clear, consistent CAP is the necessary condition. It's indispensable in terms of coordinating and bringing together all of the various elements which ensure that somebody can make a living out of farming. What are these? Well, access to land, of course, is one thing. Access to credit, access to training is another issue. And I'm thinking here about the next generation of young farmers, especially young female farmers, and the essential services that need to be provided in rural areas. So these are the instruments which will allow farmers to decide to stay in rural areas and invest in those rural areas. If we don't have a solid CAP, then we will lose the ability to deal with the issues that arise. As Copa-Cogeca, we very much welcome the strategic approach for the generational renewal, and we take stock of some of the positive aspects that have stemmed from that. The work on the Women in Agriculture platform, for instance, and also the acknowledgement of the work that is done by agri-cooperatives in supporting young farmers. We've talked a lot about the EU Land Observatory, and we at Copa-Cogeca, we think that this instrument could actually constitute and play a significant role. Of course, you need to bear in mind what the member state competencies are at play as well. There are plenty of instruments which we think at present are too fragmented. They're too piecemeal. They need to be coordinated in more efficient measures. Cohesion policy, for instance, measures for competitiveness, research and innovation, Horizon Europe, for instance. All of these policies need to work together in a coordinated fashion to ensure that services can be provided, to ensure infrastructure in rural areas, and to provide tangible support to companies. So, turning my attention now to the question that you laid at my door, the CAP will only be high quality if we ensure that it can do its job, if we ensure that it is autonomous in the way it works, has secure financing, and can fit together nicely with other agricultural policies. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, talking about the policy coherence, they're also a really important element between the CAP and the others. I want to move now from, as I already hinted, we've spoken a lot about the action at the EU level, but let's zoom in now a bit onto kind of the promising solutions on the ground. You already mentioned about connecting the dots, seeing some of the best practices from member states. I mean, Martin, perhaps can you dig in a little bit further into that? I mean, talking here about more community-based solutions to land access and on things that have worked on the ground, I mean, and doesn't work in terms of securing farming. You already mentioned that we need to look at these projects and what works and learn from them and replicate them. Can you dig a little bit further into that for us, please?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I plug into a very personal experience that I went through 13 years ago when I set up my farm. I didn't have any training in farming. I did read a lot, but I spent a whole year working together with farmers and asked them loads of questions. And actually, thanks to these collaborations, I was able to set up a farm that still exists, and that is one of the most profitable small-scale farms in Belgium now. I think collaborations, experience sharing, expertise sharing are fundamental for the new generations to be able to start. And there's loads of examples the last 15 years that emerged. There's incubator farms. There is initiatives like Terres in France, like Kulturland in Germany, like ICN in Spain, and I can go on. Actually, in every country, you find examples of community-based access to land initiatives or farming initiatives. I think these actors are they should be supported to continue their activity, because if there's new entrants into farming, it's not only thanks to the investment in rural infrastructure, which is fundamental. It has been said before, and I totally agree with that. But it's also because there is a whole network of actors supporting new farmers, giving them also a sense that they're not the only ones taking the risk, because indeed farming is a very risky business. But if you know that the risk is shared with the community, whether that be farmers or citizens or both, then you can face these challenges. I know from personal experience that this is really the case. So, yeah, we can look at European policies, but I think it's fundamental also to look at the social fabric that exists in the member states and support the development of these fabrics. Because, well, I think the development of agroecology, which offers a lot of solutions to different challenges we are facing, exists thanks to farmers and their collaborations with these citizen networks. So I think it's a fundamental thing to maintain and to develop. Yeah.
Thank you for this and for your story there. It's quite an inspirational story that to your farming journey. Corentin, let me come to you now on this point. I mean, staying with these kind of more community-based structures and solutions that Martin was speaking about there. I mean, how do you feel that young farmers, talking about land trust, cooperatives, what do you think needs to be done to make this more attractive to young farmers? Do you see them as accessible, kind of realistic options for young farmers to consider?
Donc, à la FJA.
Well, at the FJA, just latching on to what the representative of Terre-en-vue was saying, this is something that we're fundamentally not opposed to. What we want to avoid is, where you have such a setup, you could have just, an additional player that then increases the price of the land. So, we need to make sure that, the land can be bought, and that, there are ways that young people can get hold of the land. And we need to make sure that, people involved in this aren't preventing young people from actually having access to land. Of course, you need capital, but capital needs to be sought to enable young people to get established and to develop their holding. It's very interesting, but there does need to be a framework to make sure that you don't end up with it being a bad thing 5-10 years down the line.
Access to capital there, and Francisca, you were talking earlier about how women still, own less land, inherit less, face more obstacles in both leasing, buying, access to credit. Can I bring you in on this point and talk a little bit about how you see these kind of community solutions reducing gender barriers in land access, or do you still see them facing kind of disproportionate hurdles here in these kind of structures?
I'm going to speak Italian. Allora, nonostante
Well, notwithstanding the progress that's been made, we can see that female farmers are being affirmed, but there are a series of significant hurdles that female farmers still face. Access to land is certainly one of them. The Women's Committee at the Copa-Cogeca has often looked at the percentage of women who are able to essentially own land, and it's much fewer than their male counterparts. And in a range of member states, there are issues to do with succession as well. And so often land is bequeathed to male offspring rather than female offspring. As I was saying before, it's also often the case that the income of female farmers is not formalized and is not recognized as such, and therefore you can't hold land for that reason, and you can't provide any guarantees to access to credit. So access to land is the first barrier, but access to credit is then the second hurdle. And another barrier that is connected to those living in rural areas is the lack of services. On several occasions, we've talked about digital connections, and they're, of course, necessary to carry out business today. And it's also become an essential for agricultural holdings. But let's also think about essential personal services. Creches, schools, healthcare establishments, women's health services, but also mental health services. This is another very important issue that we have to grapple with. Today, all of these barriers create a situation whereby women often have to choose between whether continuing to farm or looking after their family. And we think it is high time that this ambivalence, it's something that we should do away with. There are encouraging signals out there. There are women who've shown great resilience. You know, when they're in great difficulty, they react with great resilience. And in rural areas, we can see that there are plenty of multifunctional companies and holdings that provide services for the old, the young, the disabled. Also in the tourist sector as well. So I think one thing that we could try and do is try and further coordinate all of these different instruments to ensure that women are in the position to remain in rural areas and can continue working on their agricultural holdings. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And staying on the theme there of the coordinations, how we could coordinate all of this to make sure that we're addressing these social inequalities. Saskia, maybe I come to you now. I mean, in terms of what you can see more that can be done from the EU side to address these social inequalities when it comes to access to land, in terms of gender inheritance, this intergenerational transmission we just spoke about, that Francesca just spoke about. I've been nodding too vigorously. My hair is gone. Anyway, I'll pass it over to you.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Now, yes, there's a lot that can be done. And given the range of issues that we're looking at today, when we were talking about revenue, for instance, we're talking about revenue for farmers, them having a better pension, and that will enable them, then to sell their land rather than benefiting from subsidies. And then there's the whole issue of the definition of an active farmer, the issue then of the observatory. Well, we want to attach ambitions to it, and we want it to be able to exchange best practices, analyse, and also say that the objective is that our member states put in place land access policies that are fairer and based on this idea of generational renew to facilitate access to land. And therefore it needs to have the ability to regulate, notably regulate land markets. I think that these are levers that we need to harness at a European level. We haven't talked today about the fact that this sector actually really wants some guidelines on agricultural land or some regulation. I think that would then be binding on member states, be based on best practices. The objective here would be social transition, and that brings us to the issue of equality, gender equality. For instance, the European Union, the Commission, the Parliament have decided to take up this issue and make it a cross-cutting issue. Gender mainstreaming, it's high time for this. We shouldn't just have women thinking about women's issues. No, we need to look at how we can integrate into all of our European policies, be it access to land, be it a succession, be it empowerment, cooperatives and all the rest of that, all of the informal roles that women play in the agricultural sector. It's often women who provide that supporting role, and actually acknowledging all of that informal work. We've not got to that point yet, and that plays a fundamental role, I believe, because we know, and this brings us back to the whole issue of revenue. We can see how all of these issues are intertwined. I think there is also an issue. There is a lack in terms of matching. Those that want a farm and those that can't find anyone to hand their farm to. So this whole issue of land registries and lists and providing support for that. And I think the EU actually can harness, has levers to harness here. There is a budget. Of course, this is the biggest chunk of the European budget. The European Union has encouraged a certain type of model for decades, supporting farmers in the transition, and it is able to do that today. It is able to support farmers in a new form of transition, which is much more based on social equity, generational renewal, a diversity of forms of farming, which of course needs to be encouraged. Cooperatives is part and parcel of that. And, you know, I agree with the observation that was made. You know, the services provided by farmers to nature, and I'd like to underline this. We consider farmers more as people who have a fundamental job for all of us, for society at large. We need to really put people who work the land at front and centre in our policy making. Citizens seem to be, you know, more and more rejecting the use of pesticides, and they point the finger at farmers and think that they're responsible for health issues and pollution. But I think it's a bigger issue, and I think we need to move away from making this an individual question. No, we need to look at policies which enable farmers to be supported in the changes that they make. And that needs to be on a European level. I think we really need to think the rationale that is behind the CAP. You know, we need to look at the social and human aspects of it as well. We need to look at the food, what kind of food production system we want for Europe. And I think that would sort of sharpen our perspective in terms of agriculture.
Behind the cap, that's a big that's going to be a big task over the next few years. Did you want to respond on this point, or did you have a no? Okay, well, in which case I will continue with a theme that you so nicely set me up here for, because my next question, I liked what you said about this matchmaking of, like, you know, we have the new farmers that can't find the land, and we have the old farmers that are leaving and can't find someone to take the farm. And I've come across now multiple projects. I'm thinking of one in Ireland, but also others in France, where they're doing this kind of matchmaking, right, between the two. And a few times I've heard it referred to as some kind of Tinder for farmers, which I quite enjoy it. It's funny, I've heard that in different countries now. So Corentin, I wanted to come to you on this point, because I do see a lot of potential here, and I'm curious about how you see, you know, how these initiatives can grow, how they can be supported to grow, but also there is a little bit of a romanticization about it. I think there's often many bumps in this road of passing from a retiring farmer to a new farmer, and in my experience when I'm speaking with them, it can be a difficult transition. So I'm curious to hear from you, like, how we can smooth that transition to the best of our abilities.
Donc votre question tombe très bien.
It's a very relevant question, because the FFJA, for example, is one of the major Wallonia agricultural organizations, and we're looking at this transmission in order to try and put those who are retiring from farming in contact with those who want to become farmers. So to implement this, we do need financing. The decision was made to have the possibility of this network and to implement our ideas. This financing from these organizations is very difficult, of course. When we're talking about generational renewal, putting young people as a priority, then we need support for these types of projects like our own. When it comes to the challenges that we face in this regard, in Wallonia, for example, when a farmer passes down the farm to their child, it's a privileged transmission to give it to their child. But if they do so outside the family, then that isn't the case, and so it's difficult to do so. So they can pass on the small number of items that they own themselves, but for the ones that they're just renting or they don't, then it's more difficult. And so they're not going to ask questions if they're giving all of their land to their own child. And so this is something which is an issue for farmers. Maybe they'll have to pay 30% of the value of the farm, and so they'll have second thoughts about it. Now, close with what I began with. A key part of this is the definition of an active farmer, so that when a farmer reaches pension age, they can see that what they've worked for their entire life has a value. They can pass on their values and their farm. And this will allow what they've built up to continue to work. And then young people who have been dreaming of becoming farmers for a long time can actually finally see that become a reality.
Gladly, because I think the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of new initiatives that started to facilitate farm succession. I think it's paramount that we maintain the expertise that has been developed, because farm succession is an enormous opportunity to restore rural social life, to also encourage the transition towards sustainable practices. So I think but there is examples in Ireland. There is IFOAM and Terres and terres working in France. In Belgium, we have very good collaboration on this issue, as you said. So there is plenty of good examples. And again, I think this is where Europe can come in as a facilitator to distribute, let's say, best practices. And indeed, the transaction costs for external succession, so extra family succession, are enormous, in the sense that, well, nothing is actually facilitating the situation, so it's more costly. Well, I was taking care of a farm succession in which there were a lot of lease contracts, and indeed we had to go to every single landowner to negotiate a new contract. And okay, the time that takes is enormous, whereas if you're within the family, you can just take them over if you have a classical land lease, because there's different types of land lease contracts, of course, and not all of them give this privilege, unfortunately. So this transaction cost can only be, I would say, reduced if experts who have gone through different successions are, well, can step into the picture. But that means indeed that Europe should invest. And what I hear from Hansen is that we have this mentorship platform. I think it's a very good initiative that should be supported, because it does have a lot of promising effects, notably to sustain what already exists. I think we shouldn't reinvent everything, but just, for instance, go and see what Maria van Bokstel did in Holland. She set up a system like Tinder for farmers, and is extremely successful. And so there is plenty of good examples. Yeah.
Nice positive note to wrap things up on. I'm conscious the clock is ticking. I want to take some questions from the audience. Francesca, you had a point you wanted to respond on, or yeah? Oh yeah, okay, fine.
Volevo semplicemente.
I just wanted to invite you, in fact, I'll just give you a second to put your headphones on. I wanted to share an invitation with each and every one of you. The 30th of December, we'll be here in Parliament for the award of a prize that was set up by the Copa-Cogeca Women's Committee, because what we want to do is we want to shine a light. We always try to do this, shine a light on women in agriculture. This is an innovation prize, Women in Agriculture. In this edition, we have focused on what we think is a very hot topic, and that is the sustainable use of water. So we will have awards for companies that have adopted good practices in terms of the sustainable use of water. And this is the contribution that our committee is trying to make to the work that is being done by female farmers. Thank you.
Great. So an invitation extended to you all. Thank you for that. Do we have any questions from the audience for any of our panelists? We've got a few minutes. If there are any questions, yes. Anne, would you like to say who your question is directed to?
Yeah, sorry, I spoke a lot already. I think this time I'm going to make it in French, because like speaking about land is complicated. Du coup, on a pas mal parlé du...
We spoke quite a lot about the Land Observatory. I have a question on the maintaining the organic aspect when it comes to the transmission of organic farms. often it comes to a conventional farming because there's no organic farmers who want to take this up. So this is not just a question of maintaining organic land, but also not wasting public money, because those funds from the CAP to turn it into a organic farm, and that's been put into the farm as an organic farm, and then it's goes to waste if it turns into a conventional farm. So my first question is, within the project of the EU Land Observatory, is anything specific stipulated when it comes to organic farming? And the second question, are there any solutions foreseen when it comes to land if there aren't any organic farmers who are willing to take up the new farm when it's being transmitted?
Yeah, so we participated in the first steering meeting of the Land Observatory, and indeed this question was not integrated initially, but it is in debate because indeed I think it's we think as a network it's fundamental to maintain what already exists. There is also a principle in European law called standstill. So you cannot let a situation, for instance, when it comes to water or soil quality, degrade and go below the point where we have gotten now. And so if organic farming were to decline, as is the case in many European countries, we do lose soil quality. So this is one of the ways that we can address the question. And I think it's going to be fundamental, actually, in the functioning of the Land Observatory to link with water, soil, and biodiversity, as I said before, because these are measurable features. So, yeah, that's for the moment what I can say about that. But as it has been said before, it's a pilot project. It will only last for a year, and then there will be an evaluation of, okay, how does this test phase what does it give as a result? And I hope that this element will be part of it.
J'ajoute à ça.
I would just add, if we zoom out from the Land Observatory and organic farming, I'd say that for us, what we want is very fixed numbers when it comes to the percentage of land which is organic. And so this is about the transition towards a very environmental agriculture. And so fundamentally, we regret that the Green Pact are no longer hot topics in the EU. No one talks about them anymore. So we're talking about sector by sector support. In the organic sector, we need to get back on track and put this topic back on the agenda, because once again it's a topic which affects lots of different areas of Europe. So biodiversity and health, for example. So that's the observation of the last few weeks and months. We've seen that there's been a lot of deregulation when it comes to environmental regulation, especially when it comes to plans for regulation for a transition to a more successful and fair a transition towards a more organic farming. This should become more mainstream rather than a very niche and accessible topic.
I hope that answered your questions. If there are no other burning questions, I think I will bring this. Don't see anything. I think I'll bring this panel to a close, in which case, so thank you very much to all of our panelists here, and perhaps a round of applause for our speakers here. Thank you very much to all of you. You can invite you to take a seat. And I would now like to invite up the last speaker of today for some conclusions, which is also the third kind host of today's event, and that is Green MEP David Cormand. So David, I will invite you to the stage. It's okay, we're a bit tangled here. There we go. Excellent. Thank you very much. I pass you the floor for your concluding remarks.
Merci, bonsoir.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you Interpreters, can you remain for a few more minutes? Yes, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for these excellent exchanges. I'll be brief because then we can have a coffee later and continue our discussions, but I know that a lot has already been said. I want to note that what we want here is to see a succession for farmers without losing our value. And what we want as well is that we've seen over the last few years that those decision makers in agriculture are wanting to reduce the number of holdings, and they want more conform farmings. They want more industrial farming with a distribution model which is almost entirely for major supermarkets, and therefore that has a direct consequence. There are larger holders and fewer farmers, and I'd add to that as well that there are ever smaller incomes for our farmers. And so I'll conclude by talking about the concrete proposals that we can make. Firstly, we can fight against the current MFF budget, which isn't giving us a clear agricultural strategy. Secondly, we need to ensure that our holdings and farms are able to be passed down, because currently, as they're so expensive, it's difficult. We're currently seeing a cannibalization in terms of industrial farms, and so we need to allow farms to maintain a size that can then it's able to be passed down. And so, as many of our speakers said, the future of farming will be down to everybody's commitment and engagement, and the role and the hard work of women in this sector. Women have long been working in the sector, but there hasn't been a specific payment necessarily for that, or a specific regulated role. And then with supposed conventional agriculture, this has been mentioned as well. Regardless of what we think, yes, organic farming today is a catalyst to improve our agriculture. And so if we want to see more people and more young people in agriculture, and of course we do, and I'm open to those working in organic agriculture, then we need to promote our organic farms. And finally, there's the commitments that have been announced so far. For example, the 6% minimum ring fencing for young farmers. We need these commitments to be mandatory and not simply facultative. And this needs to be imposed on all the member states. And the final point is possibly the most simple but the most difficult to implement. Our work needs to pay. Agriculture is one of the key sectors which has been suffered as Uberization. There are farmers who are entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs don't decide exactly how much they can sell their wares for, and that wouldn't happen in any other sector. And so we need to ban loss leading and strengthen our farmers within the agri-food chain. This is the key condition in order to have a great commitment in this sector. Of course, I didn't have quite as much time as I wanted, but I was brief. But count on us, and we'll meet later for a coffee.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, David. Thank you to everyone that spoke here. Thank you to our translators as well, our interpreters today. Very grateful to all of you, and looking forward to continuing the discussion now over a coffee, which you'll find over here. So I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you very much.